not a big secret that villains tend to be very popular in media, and the Harbingers are no different. I love the Harbingers, you probably love the Harbingers. A Winter's Night Lazo has 17 million views. People just seem to really like them. No, of course they aren't for everyone. Sometimes when done poorly, villains are cringe at best and ruin the entire story at worst. With the recent release of The Knave, I think now is the perfect time to talk about the state of villains in Genshin Impact, specifically the Harbingers. Before that, we're gonna have to define what a villain in a story is and how it differs from an antagonist. A villain is a character that is basically someone who does evil things, like they do bad stuff that hurt others around them with little to no remorse. This definition definitely applies to a lot of the Harbingers that we know, like Dottore is the most obvious one. He's a murderer, he experiments on children, and is just an overall evil person. He's also what we consider to be an antagonist because he does serve in opposition to the protagonist, that being the Traveler. Now, all of the Harbingers are antagonists. They have gone against the Traveler at least once, but are they all villains? I would say so. They all do bad things, some of them more than others. There's no denying that they have done really messed up shit in order to achieve their goal, be it the Tsaritsa's goal or their own personal goals. But are they all good villains? So let's talk about the Harbingers, the morality of the Harbingers, and what makes or breaks a villain. Now, I actually made this positioning map for the Harbingers, at least one that we know now, to see where they land while making this video. Was this necessary? No. I 100% pulled this out of my ass, but I thought it might be fun, so I share with you all. So on the x-axis, we have the are they actually developed three-dimensional villains, or were they shelved aside as fast as they were introduced? Why this metric? Because for me personally, to have an interesting, memorable, and a well-written villain, they need to at least have some development in the actual story. And that development is needed because we as the audience or players need to understand the motivations behind a villain character, or else they would feel very one-note and forgettable. If we as the audience can understand what motivates them, it's a lot easier for us to understand their actions. We need to spend as much time as we can with said villains, and if it's really good, they would have an entire arc about why they do the things that they do, and even have that story affect the protagonist and the overall narrative. Next, we have the morality spectrum, or in this case, the not necessarily evil and pure evil. Now, we need to be clear when I say they're not evil is that they're not out here actively trying to harm others, because let's face it, being a Harbinger does mean that you're up for some pretty shady and dubious stuff by default. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're pure evil, hence why there's a spectrum. And I've placed each of the Harbinger on this positioning map, and by that I mean only a few of them, of course, the 5 that we know so far. And I'll explain their placement as I reveal them one by one. So let's start with Signora. I think she has the least development out of all the Harbingers, and that's because she died, which is a shame because she had so much potential. It makes me so sad that she was gone too soon. So a bit of background on Signora. Right off the bat, we know that she's not a good person. She first appears at the end of the Mondstadt Archon quest, where she ambushed Venti and the Traveler and stole Venti's gnosis after kicking his ass. So not the nicest person that you can meet. The next time we see her is in Liyue, where she essentially duped a fellow Harbinger, which shows that she's very manipulative but is also very reliable and competent in her job. Her deceiving, or at least keeping Childe in the dark, is purely based off of the Tsaritsa's contract with Zhongli. So from that, we know she's only acting in the Tsaritsa's interest. And we see her again in Inazuma as the one in charge of causing chaos. The whole delusion factory and everything that's been happening is orchestrated by Signora. Scaramouche was there due to her request. And then she accepted the Traveler's challenge for a duel before the throne, and then she lost and got executed by the Raiden Shogun. In hindsight, this makes Signora feel like a one-note villain and character. We essentially know nothing about her other than she's mean and she's collecting the gnosis. That is, of course, unless you read the entire lore behind the Crimson Witch of Flames artifact set. The entire lore behind that artifact set is Signora's backstory. It's revealed that Signora, whose real name is Rosalind by the way, is originally from Mondstadt, and then she went to Sumeru to study in the academia around 500 years ago. She also also had a lover named Rostam in Mondstadt at the time, who is also a knight, and when Rostam died in the cataclysm, Rosalind became consumed with grief and anger, and she used her life's flame to cleanse the world. She abandoned her mortal body to let liquid flame flow through her body instead. This is mentioned to be a lost art and magic in recent days. She then would use her firepower to cleanse the monsters in Mondstadt, but due to the unusual nature of her power and her overall appearance, she's often dubbed as the Crimson Witch of Flames by the people, which you can understand why she would feel insulted by this. All she wanted to do was eradicate the monsters responsible for her lover's demise, and yet people branded her as a witch. She's also very angry at the Anemo Archon, who in her mind failed to protect his own people and let her lover die as a result. It's debatable whether or not Venti actually knows about Signora/Rosalind, but knowing Venti, he probably does. She was later discovered by the jester himself, and he gave her a cryo delusion, and the rest was history. She became a harbinger and seems to be the one tasked with finding the gnosis before, well, she died. With all of that, it's pretty obvious that Signora was a wasted potential. Her time in the main quest and with the players was too short to fully develop her and make players understand her motives. As far as most of the player base is concerned, Signora just died doing her job and being overly confident in her abilities. Her fire abilities were also never really explained. There's another harbinger that has very unusual firepower, but unlike her, Signora's was only mentioned as fire magic, which unfortunately leaves her as an underdeveloped villain. There was so much to explore with her, like just being able to see her backstory before she died would have done wonders to her as a character. Like if we did, she would have been more nuanced, and when she does die in the story, it would have felt like it was a tragic conclusion to her arc. Even her last words were translated weirdly. Now, I don't speak Chinese, but I remember this being pointed out by Chinese and Japanese speakers as Signora saying that she can't afford to die here because she has a lot of unfinished business. Yet somehow this is the English translation, which makes her feel even more like a one-note villain that lacks nuance. At the end of the day, she was really a character that was gone too soon. A shame, really. And in terms of morality, because we never really got the chance to see her that much, it's actually really hard to say. All we know that is what the jester says about her in A Winter's Night Lazo, and also the flower in the Pale Flame set. Signora's one true goal was always to cleanse the world of Tevat, a world that to her is filled with injustice and corruption, a world that was cruel enough to take away the one person that mattered to her the most, a world where a god abandoned his people. And she saw the cleansing of that world in the delusion that was given to her by Piero and in the promise made by the Syriza. Piero also promises her on her deathbed that she will be buried alongside the old world, further confirming that was always Signora's goal and why she stuck around with the Fatui. So then why not just establish all that in the main quest before you kill her off? It will forever bug me because that's so much wasted potential. Like, that's an entire tragic character arc that we could have had, but instead it's locked behind a wall of text. But maybe Signora will get resurrected or something, I don't know, but for now, this is where I would place her in my positioning map. She's underdeveloped, and in terms of morality, she's in the Fatui because she wants to watch the world that hurt her burn away. So, not the most moral thing you would do. I don't think Signora is a morally gray character by any means. I wouldn't say she's pure evil, but she is completely okay with the destruction of innocent people if it means she can cleanse the world. And I think that's fine. Not every villain character needs to be morally gray. I think it's fine that we have characters that are morally bad, especially the ones that we can understand. We understand that Signora's actions and anger comes from grief and her inability to overcome it despite living for over 5 centuries. It definitely doesn't make her a badly written character. Her criminally short screen time did. Now moving on to the second harbinger that we meet, Tile Tartaglia Ajax. He is introduced in a very different way than Signora. He is actually very friendly to the Traveler. He even saved the Traveler when they were being chased by the Millilith under the suspicion of murdering Liwei's Archon. Now, he didn't do all that because he just felt like helping someone. He had his own ulterior motives. He just has a much nicer approach than a lot of the harbingers. We spent quite a bit of time with him in the Liwei Archon quest. He's the one who introduced us to Zhongli. He gave us the Sigil of Permission, and he genuinely seemed like a nice guy. He serves as a great juxtaposition to Signora's hostility in the Archon quest prior to this one. Childe does eventually come head to head with the Traveler because he is after the Gnosis, this, and after he loses the fight, he comes to the conclusion that Morax is not dead. He tries to lure him out with Osail, but that plan is of course thwarted by the Liwei Chising and the Traveler. Now, this event has always been considered the moment Childe showed us his true colors and how evil he is. To some extent, I think that's true. This moment showed that Childe willingly gambled the lives of the people of Liwei in order to do his job. Did he want to kill all of those people? No. He has said that hurting innocent people is something that he doesn't want to do. He says so himself that he's reluctant to summon Osail. That was his last resort because it could potentially hurt a lot of people. But in the end, he still did it anyway. And yes, the Chising and Adepti were able to defeat Osail on their own, and if they somehow failed, Zhongli was there to take care of the problem. And again, Childe did unleash Osail while convinced that Zhongli is alive, but if he were dead and if the Chising had failed, then Childe would have harmed an entire nation because he wanted to obtain the Gnosis. This is obviously not an act that a morally upstanding guy would do. So does that mean Childe is evil? I wouldn't say that he's completely evil, because outside of these very extreme moments, Childe seems pretty normal, or as normal as an unhinged guy would be. He actively looks for strong opponents to fight, and he does get himself into a lot of trouble, but he doesn't actively harm the innocent. At least so far, it's not shown that he does. He sees himself as the weapon of the Syriza and will follow orders. So he's more like the ultimate soldier more than anything. And as the story goes on, Childe does seem to really only care about 3 things in his life, as pointed out by this comment on my Childe video. Those 3 things being 1, his family, 2, the Syriza, and 3, fighting. Him genuinely loving his family doesn't mean he's not evil or that the things that he was willing to do were somehow okay. He was still very much in the wrong, and he will probably continue to do morally questionable things as long as it serves his interest in providing for his family, helping the Syriza, and getting him into lots of good fights. It does, however, make him an almost morally gray character. He's a wild card. He's a villain that is unpredictable, which makes him an interesting character to follow. Let's talk about some made-up scenarios. So like, what if the Fatui holds his family hostage or puts them at risk? Which seems to be the case, as implied by the Wanderer. Will Childe's loyalty towards the Syriza falter? Will he abandon his position as a harbinger? Will he sacrifice himself in order to save his family or team up with the Traveler to do so? If he does abandon the Fatui, then how would he feel abandoning a cause that he himself fully believed in? This kind of moral dilemma is something that I hope to see from Childe when we do finally get to Snezhnaya next year, by the way. Can you believe that? Which is why I think this is where I would place Childe, at least as of right now. He's not a complete good guy, but he's not a complete bad guy either. He's shown to be nice to the people around him, his subordinates, the Traveler outside of that one confrontation, and even some randos he met in jail. But he's also someone who doesn't seem to have any qualms making decisions that could potentially harm a lot of people. And we have spent enough time with Childe both in the Archon quest and some events to get a sense where Hoyo might be going with him as a character. It's definitely enough material to make him feel like he has layers and isn't a one-note villain. And of course, I think we're just barely scraping the surface when it comes to Childe. Like, there's still so much that we don't know about him, especially stuff that's related to Skirk and the Abyss, and how the Abyss really changed him as a person. The next harbinger that we encounter in the game chronologically is the Balladeer. The Balladeer is actually one of the most polarizing characters in Genshin. You either love him or you hate him. In the beginning, he's definitely very one-note. Like, he says and acts like a standard villain would. He's very sarcastic, and after being fake for a good few hours, he is openly hostile towards the Traveler. Like, he actually actively tries to kill them multiple times. And the more we know about his history, it also actually gets worse, because thanks to the Husk of Opulence Dream artifact set and also the Irodori Festival event, we learned that he's responsible for the downfall of multiple bladesmithing clans, specifically those related to the Raiden Gokaden. And he does this because of an event that happened earlier in his life. It's a very long story, but the gist of it is that early in his life, right after he woke up in the Shakkei Pavilion, he lived alongside bladesmiths in Tatarasuna. And one of those bladesmiths who he trusted very deeply betrayed him. Well, at least he thought so, but we all know the truth behind that whole mess. So because of those events and several others that pushed Scaramouche over the edge, he decided to exact revenge on the bladesmiths by destroying the families tied to the Raiden Gokuden. That, and because he also hates A for abandoning him in the Shake Pavilion, and later on for not agreeing to meet with him when he needed her the most. But of course now we know that A was in no position to even see him, even if she agreed to. She was already inside the plane of Euthymia when Scaramouche requested to see her. These families, of course, did nothing wrong. They were innocent people. Even the original bladesmith, Niwa, was innocent because Dottore orchestrated the whole thing. Dottore killed Niwa in cold blood. He took this man's heart and then lied to Scaramouche that Niwa was the one who murdered some random guy, took his heart, and ran away in shame. And even if Scaramouche was betrayed, he still chose to direct his anger on people who were completely innocent. He soon got bored and stopped his killing spree and joined the Fatui, where he was also mean-spirited and abusive towards his subordinates. Like, he would hit them for no reason. He's definitely not a favorite amongst the Fatui. He maintains this behavior for pretty much the entire time until we meet him in the Unreconciled Stars event, which again, where he was very much two-faced and tried to kill the traveler as soon as he had the chance. The second time we bumped into him is actually in the Delusion Factory in Inazuma, where he wasn't really much better. He still insulted the traveler, made fun of their dead friend, and tried to kill them until Yaemiko swooped in. In Sumeru, it actually gets kinda worse because we learned that Scaramouche betrayed the Fatui since it no longer served him any purpose. And ever since he was created, all Scaramouche wanted was a Gnosis. He was created by A to hold the Gnosis after all, so he had always felt like it belonged to him. That, and he's also developed a major god complex and agreed to work with the Grand Sage of the Academia and the Doctor to achieve divinity. Unlike Childe and Signora, Scaramouche clearly has no loyalty. He at this point in the story doesn't seem to care about anyone but himself. Like, he will throw you under the bus or kill you if it means getting what he wants. But it wasn't always like this. In the very beginning, Scaramouche, or the Kabukimono as he was known back then, used to be very gentle. He was often described as a blank slate and was very kind to the people around him. He was also implied to have cared a great deal about the people of Tatarasuna. When the furnace inevitably caused the people to fall ill, the Kabukimono voluntarily went all the way to Narukami Island in hopes that he can persuade the Raiden Shogun to help. He was met with Yaemiko instead, and unfortunately when the help that Yaemiko promised arrived, things had already escalated in Tatarasuna, and this event only added to the Kabukimono's already brewing anger towards both humans and gods. That is obviously a lot of lore, and what surprised me is that Hoyo really took their time with Scaramouche / the Wanderer. He was introduced in 1.1 and then he shows up in Inazuma and was teased multiple times in events. That being the Labyrinth of Warriors one, and the Irodori Festival was essentially about him and how he was responsible in destroying the Kaedehara clan. And then he became one of the main antagonists in Sumeru, and then he got an entire interlude quest that was there to explore his backstory in great detail. And the Wanderer did have character development. I went into more detail in my 1-hour Wanderer video, but in my opinion, while he did go through some changes, he was not redeemed. Like, he himself knows that just because now he can acknowledge that what he did was evil and hurt a lot of innocent people, that doesn't automatically mean that he is redeemed. After meeting Nahida and learning the truth behind what really happened in Tatarasuna, the Wanderer learned that everything he did, all of the people he hurt, all of his anger was all for nothing. He was able to recognize that perhaps without him, the Doctor would not have even been in Tatarasuna, therefore Niwa and so many others might have lived better lives. He wanted to erase himself from existence because he thought by doing so, the people who unfairly lost their lives because of him would have been given a second chance. In my opinion, this does show that he does have some humanity in him, that he does care for other people. Like, the people of Tatarasuna confirms that all of his actions were driven by anger and rage more than it was anything else. Does that justify the murder of countless innocent people? No, absolutely not. Which is why he's not redeemed. He has only started his character growth and redemption arc. Even now, he's still a pretty awful person. Like, he's outwardly rude to almost everyone he meets, but he does seem to at least respect Nahida after all she's done for him. And I do think that this makes him the most developed Harbinger. Hell, I think character in the game in general. We had more than enough time to understand his actions. He's had an entire character arc and has developed relationships with different characters. So in my opinion, Scaramouche or the Wanderer falls somewhere around here on the positioning map. He's not pure evil. I still think that he's morally very bad even now. Like, you can care about some people in your life and be kind and respectful towards those people, and also you can acknowledge your past mistakes and the harm that you've done, but it doesn't mean that you're automatically a good person now. The Wanderer still needs a lot of work to make up for all of his past mistakes, and I think with Nahida's guidance, he might just have a chance at redemption. Next, we have Dottore. Now, obviously, up until this point, Dottore is not yet playable, and honestly, given how terrible of a person he is, I'm not sure that he will be. I personally think having the characters be on good terms with the Traveler in order to be playable is kinda dumb. I don't like it because I think it's very hard to make someone as irredeemable as Dottore playable, because I have a hard time imagining the Traveler tolerating someone like him. Sure, Scaramouche was terrible, like mass murderer terrible, but the whole point of the interlude quest was to show the players that he had no real autonomy of his own life. He was merely a puppet, pun intended. And guess who was basically the puppet master that pushed Scaramouche over the edge and murdered Niwa on screen. If murder wasn't enough for you, Dottore is also responsible for human experiments. One of his victims is Childe. He also had the Fatui kidnap children so that he could lure the Aranara out and experiment on them, because you know, only children can see the Aranara. Like every supervillain thing you can think of, this guy has probably done it. He even has Horcruxes running around before Nahida made a deal with him to destroy them, and that deal cost her the Electronosis. He was also only able to create these Horcruxes or segments of himself after he experimented on Scaramouche for years on end, and as pointed out by Signora, those experiments were not pleasant. Not even a backstory can make him sympathetic at this point. Like, it would be very difficult to paint Dottore as someone that is redeemable or even morally great. This guy is just pure evil, and I think that's fine. Again, not every villain needs to be morally great. Sometimes it actually helps to establish a spectrum and make the more morally gray characters feel actually, well, morally gray. With the existence of characters like Dottore, the other characters like Childe, Scaramouche, and Signora all feel like they're not as bad now, do they? Like, they're still bad, but in the presence of a character that's pure evil, it puts things in perspective. Dottore is interesting to me because he's barely on screen and isn't playable yet, but he already has so much lore surrounding him, and all of them are terrible. Like, wherever this guy goes, there's always chaos. He's like the boogeyman of Genshin at this point. We know from the Pale Flame artifact set that he was always keen on making enhanced humans even as a student in his academia days, which is later elaborated that his desire to find ways to enhance humans is so that they could be on the same playing field as the gods. He was of course expelled from the academia after multiple misconducts and apparently being suspected of murder of a fellow student. It's never confirmed, but it's implied that Dottore murdered a student and then reported to the academia that she died from a tiger attack while she was exploring the jungle with him on an expedition. She was later exhumed, and there were hints that there was foul play in her death. He would also use body parts of deceased Elazar victims to treat Elazar, like the ones implied on the notes found in the abandoned Elazar hospital in the desert. Childe, who is also a victim of Dottore's Elazar treatment, somehow ended up with god remains inside her that is later on sealed by Sino. He also worked very closely with Crusabina, who was the predecessor of Arlecchino and who was the one making orphan children kill each other. The children that survived Crusabina's sick games were either sent to dangerous missions or to Dottore, where most of, if not all of them, ended up dead. But clearly, Dottore has no problems in experimenting with children, body parts, Kandrian technology, Archon residue, and even forbidden knowledge. There is nothing that will stop Dottore in the name of research. So for now, I will put him on this side of the map. Like, I don't know, maybe this might age like milk and maybe Hoyo will find ways to redeem him, but for now, it's pretty safe to say that the guy is pure evil. Last but definitely not least is Arlecchino. Now, she's actually the entire reason I wanted to make this video, because she's what I would call morally gray, at least amongst the harbingers. She's the antagonist, but she's never really done anything that's harmed the Traveler. Like, even in the Fontaine Archon quest, she was mostly in the background and didn't do any of the dirty work in hunting down the Gnosis. She mostly intimidates everyone and shows up to say cryptic stuff while the children of the House of the Hearth do the sleuthing for her. She does try to murder Furina though, but changes her mind as soon as she realizes that Furina might not hold the diagnosis or is even the Archon of Fontaine, which is interesting to me because then it seems like Arlecchino isn't really one to kill unless it's for a purpose or if it's for revenge. There's also the fact that in her story quest, she's shown to care very deeply about the children of the house. She willingly worked with the doctor so that they could leave the house and live normal lives if they wanted to without having to be executed because they knew too much. She also didn't punish Linny, Lynette, and Fremine for their betrayal. This is obviously because she was once a child of the house herself who had it a lot worse because she grew up under an actual psychopath. Fremine does speak a lot about this and how when Arlecchino became in charge of the House of the Hearth, a lot changed. But at the end of the day, she is still using these children as agents of war. It's a known fact that once the children of the House of the Hearth grow up, some of them are chosen to be a part of the fatui, either serving directly under Arlecchino herself or the other harbingers. She's manipulative, she's ruthless, and she's very much capable of cold-blooded murder. The bar that Crusabina set was literally underground, okay? Compared to her, it's easy to make someone look like a good person. Obviously, Arlecchino is supposed to be more complex than Crusabina, like she's supposed to have more layers. Her motivations aren't as shallow as her predecessor. In fact, we still don't know what she really wants, but it doesn't seem to be torturing children or murdering innocent people or even wanting to see the world burn, which is what makes her so great. Like, despite everything she went through, it's not like she's taking out her anger on the world the same way Scaramouche or even Signora did. Like, as far as we know, she's essentially the same person. She murdered Crusabina after Clarvy died, but once the person responsible for her pain is gone, she's still as ruthless as ever, which again I like because I think it makes her different from Signora and Scaramouche, where their pain became the source of their anger. I think it's also interesting that despite everything that she went through, she still believes that the system set in place by Crusabina is still necessary. Not the Hunger Games part, but the part where certain rules cannot be broken in order to ensure the safety of the house and the children. Despite all of her reforms, Arlecchino does still enforce one vital rule, and that is loyalty. Now, I don't know how long she's had her flames engineered. Like, we know based on what Linny said that she was approached by the doctor fairly early on, but we don't know when she was able to use those flames. So before she could, does that mean she had to kill the children who wanted to leave? Based on the way she was adamant about adhering to the rules, I don't think it's that far-fetched. But she did try to find a way to make sure that she doesn't have to kill them anymore. I also think that her backstory was never intended to make her sympathetic. I think it's there just to make the players understand her and her actions better. Arlecchino can feel pain and be a victim of abuse and is suffering from trauma, but she can also be guilty of basically grooming children into being soldiers. Those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. I guess there was a high expectation of her to be this ruthless psychopath because of what Childe and the Wanderer had to say about her, which either means that they're unreliable narrators or that we've only been scratching the surface when it comes to Arlecchino. I think it's also stated or implied somewhere that Arlecchino actually lets people believe what they want to believe about her because it works to her advantage. So the Wanderer and Childe having this complete misconception about who she is actually pretty believable. As of now, we only know her backstory and not much else, and that backstory was already fully shown in a fully 2D animated video released by Hoyo, and it's ultimately an exploration of her relationship with the House of the Hearth and its children. We still don't know anything about her heritage and why she's special and has special powers, but from what we have seen as the Traveler, she can show a lot of compassion towards her own kin despite being a harbinger. Yes, again, she's grooming child soldiers and is completely fine with them being in danger, but she will also mourn the loss of their lives and has apparently murdered the people responsible. This behavior that we have seen so far allows her to have nuance, and nuance automatically makes her a more interesting character and villain. We are left in a place where we actually don't know what she will do next. She's tolerable to the Traveler because she's never done anything directly to them and their companions. But let's say later on, if we come face to face with the Knave and are on opposite sides, what will she do? This dichotomy is actually perfect for her because now I don't know what she'll actually do in a situation where the well-being of the children of the House of the Hearth isn't on the line, because that does seem to be the only thing that she cares about. This is a question that I personally don't have an answer to because we really still don't know enough about her despite knowing so much of her backstory and having spent a good amount of time with her during our time in Fontaine. And with that, this is where I would place Arlecchino arlecchino. Now please let me know if you disagree with this and why, and also where you think they might land. I personally think the harbingers so far are probably the most interesting group of people to follow. They're all awful people to an extent, but the ones we know as of now are surprisingly distinct from one another. Like Hoyo did a really good job in making them feel like actual human beings and actual characters. They're pretty much complete with backstories, motivations, and moral principles that are vastly different, yet they're all working for the Saritsa and towards one common goal. At least for now. It's an interesting dynamic, and I wish we got more harbinger interactions because this unique dynamic is what makes them fun to watch and follow. Like that interaction between Arlecchino and Childe, that was very short and nothing really happens, but it's still entertaining to me because I found it funny that Childe kept asking seemingly harmless questions that are actually vital information, like why Arlecchino is called father instead of mother. Which begs the question, is that why villains are so popular? In this case, why are the harbingers so popular? Like, to have a good villain, they have to be memorable and they have to be interesting or at least entertaining. And I think the harbingers are more than entertaining. They serve the same person, but they're also distinct from one another. Like, some of them are loyal, some of them are purely acting based on self-interest. They are a very unhinged group of people. Like, Dottore is there because the fatui can fund his crazy research. Childe just wants to fight and have a good time and provide for his family. The Wanderer was basically just passing time there and thought it would be fun, which is why he bolted the moment he got bored and wanted to do something else. Signora was there to see the world burn. And Arlecchino, not entirely clear yet on why she's serving the Saritsa. It could be because she wants to take care of the children, but who knows? And I'm pretty sure the Jester is aware of this, which also makes me wonder why he and the Saritsa would place all of their cards on people who are basically impossible to control. I mean, look at Scaramouche. He turned his back on them as soon as he got his hands on the Gnosis. Unfortunately, that's all we know of the harbingers so far. I want to place all of the harbingers on the positioning map, but we literally know nothing about them other than their names and crumbs from voice lines that's apparently not even 100% reliable now. So we'll just have to wait. And that's all I have to say for now. Was there a point to this video? Probably not. I just wanted an excuse to talk about them because I like them as characters and I think they're pretty easily misunderstood as characters also. So yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want. If not, that's okay. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!